Hello, members. I say members because the members get this first before anybody else actually gets it. So we're now on The Time Is at Hand, Joan of Arc. The young can sink into abysses of despondency, and it was so with Noel and me now. But the hopes of the young are quick to rise again, and it was so with ours. We called back that vague promise of the voices, and said the one to the other that the glorious release was to happen at the last moment. That other time was not the last moment, but this is. It will happen now. The king will come, Lahire will come, and with them our veterans, and behind them all of France. And so we were full of heart again. Could already hear in fancy that stirring music, the clash of steel and the war cries, and the uproar of the onset. And in fancy see our prisoner free, her chains gone, her sword in her hand. But this dream was to pass also, and come to nothing. Late at night, when Manchon come in, he said, "I'm come from the dungeon, and I have a message for you from that poor child." A message to me? If he had been noticing, I think he would have discovered that my indifference concerning the prisoner was a pretence, for I was caught off my guard, and was so moved and so exalted to be honoured by her, that I must have shown my feeling in my face and manner. "A message for me, your reverence?" "Yes, it's something she wishes done. She said she had noticed the young man who helps me, and that he had a good face, and did I think he would do a kindness for her? I said I knew you would, and asked her what it was. She said, a letter. Would you write a letter to her mother? And I said I would. But I said I would do it myself, and gladly. But she said no, that my labours were heavy, and she thought of the young man would not mind the doing of this service for one not able to do it for herself. She not knowing how to write. Then I would have sent for you. And at that the sadness vanished out of my face. Why, it was as if she was going to see a friend. Poor friendless thing. But I was not permitted. I did my best. But the orders remain as strict as ever. The doors are closed against all but officials. As before, none but officials may speak to her. So I went back and told her, and she sighed, and was sad again. Now this is what she begs you to write to her mother. It is partly a strange message, and to me means nothing, but she said her mother would understand. You will convey adoring love to her family and her village friends, and say there will be no rescue, for that this night, and it is the third time in the 12th month, and is the final, she has seen the vision of the tree. How strange. Yes, it is strange, but that is what she said, and said her parents would understand. And for a little time she was lost in dreams and thinkings, and her lips moved, and I caught in her muttering these lines, which she said over 2 or 3 times, and they seemed to bring peace and contentment to her. I set them down, thinking they might have some connection with a letter and be useful, but it was not so. They were a mere memory, floating idly in a tired mind. They have no meaning, at least no relevancy. I took the piece of paper and found what I knew I should find. And when in exile wandering, we shall, fainting, yearn for glimpse of thee, or rise upon our sight. There was no hope any more. I knew it now. I knew that Joan's letter was a message to Noel and me, as well as to her family, and that its object was to banish vain hopes from our minds and tell us, from her own mouth, of the blow that was going to fall upon us, that we, being her soldiers, would know it for command to bear it as became us and her, and so submit the will of God, and in thus obeying, find assoilment of our grief. It was like her. She was always thinking of others, not of herself. Yes, her heart was sore for us. She could find time to think of us, the humblest of her servants, and try to soften our pain, lighten the burden of our troubles. She that was drinking of bitter waters, she that was walking in the valley of the shadow of death. I wrote the letter, You will know what it cost me, without my telling you. I wrote it with the same wooden stylus which had been put upon parchment the first words ever dictated by Joan of Arc, that high summons to the English to vacate France 2 years past, when she was lass of 17. It had now set down the last ones which she ever were to dictate. Then I broke it, for the pen had served Joan of Arc, and could not serve any that would come after her on this earth without abasement. The next day, May 29th, Couchon summoned his serfs, and 42 responded. It is charitable to believe that the other 20 were ashamed to come. The 42 pronounced her a relapsed heretic, and condemned her to be delivered over to the secular arm. Couchon thanked them. Then he sent orders that Joan of Arc be conveyed the next morning to a place known as Old Market, and that then she be delivered to the civil judge, and by the civil judge to the executioner. That meant she would be burnt. All the afternoon and evening of Tuesday the 29th, the news was flying, and the people of the country flocking to Rouen to see the tragedy all, at least, who could prove their English sympathies and count upon admission. The press grew thicker and thicker in the streets. The excitement grew higher and higher. And now a thing was noticeable again which had been noticeable more than once before, that there was pity for Joan in the hearts of many of those people. Whenever she had been in great danger, it had manifested itself. Now it was apparent again, manifesting a pathetic dumb sorrow which was visible in many faces. Early the next morning, Wednesday, Martin Lervenu and another friar was sent to Joan to prepare her for death. Manchon and I went with them, a hard service for me. We tramped through the dim corridors, winding this way and that, piercing ever deeper and deeper into the vast heart of stone. And at last we stood before Joan, but she did not know it. She sat with her hands in her lap and her head bowed, thinking, and her face was very sad. One might not know what she was thinking of her home, of the peaceful pastures, the friends she was no more to see, of her wrongs, had her forsaken estate, the cruelties which had been put upon her, or was it of death, the death which she had longed for, and which was now close? Or was it the kind of death she must suffer? I hope not, for she feared only one kind, and that one had for her unspeakable terrors. I believe she was so feared that one with her strong will, she would shut the thought of it wholly out of her mind, and hope and believe that God would take pity on her and grant her an easier one. And so it might chance that the awful news which we were bringing might come as a surprise to her at last. We stood silent a while, but she was still unconscious of us, deep in her musings and far away. Then Martin Lervenu said softly, "Joan?" She looked up then, with a little start and a wan smile, and said, "Speak, have you a message for me?" "Yes, my poor child." "Try to bear it. Do you think you can bear it?" "Yes," very softly, and her head drooped again. "I've come to prepare you for death." A faint shiver trembled through her wasted body, and there was a pause. In the stillness we could hear our breathings. Then she said, still in that low voice, "When will it be?" The muffled notes of a tolling bell floated to our ears out of the distance. "Now, the time is at hand." That slight shiver passed again. "It is so soon. Ah, it is so soon." There was a long silence. The distant throbbings of the bell pulsed through it, and we stood motionless and listening. But it was all broken at last. "What death is it?" "By fire." "Oh, I knew it. I knew it." She sprang wildly to her feet, and wound her hearts in her hair, and began to writhe and sob, oh, so piteously, and mourn and grieve and lament, and turn to first one and then another for us, and search our faces beseechingly, and hoping that she might find help and friendliness there. Poor thing, she that had never denied lays to any creature, even a wounded enemy on the battlefield. Oh, cruel, cruel to treat me so, and must my body, that has never been defiled, be consumed today and turned to ashes? Ah, sooner would I that my head were cut off 7 times and suffer this woeful death. I had the promise of the church's prison when I submitted, and if I had but been there, and not left here in the hands of my enemies, this miserable fate had not befallen me. Oh, I appeal to God the great judge against the injustice which has been done to me. There was none there that could endure it. They turned away with the tears running down their faces. In a moment I was on my knees at her feet, and at once she thought only of my danger, and bent and whispered in my ear, "Up, do not peril yourself, good heart. There, God bless you always." And I felt the quick clasp of her hand. Mine was the last hand she touched with hers in life. None saw it. History does not know of it, nor does it tell it. Yet it's true, just as I have told it. The next moment she saw Cauchon coming. She went and stood before him, and reproached him, saying, "Bishop, it is by you that I die." He was not ashamed, he was not touched, but said smoothly, "Be patient, Joan. You die because you have not kept your promise, but have returned to your sins." "Alas," she said, "if you had put me in the church's prison and given me right and proper keepers, as you promised, this would not have happened. And for this I summon you to answer before God." Just a minute, guys. Sorry, tried to compose myself. Then Cauchon winced and looked less placidly content than before, and he turned him about and went away. Joan stood a while musing. She grew calmer, occasionally wiped her eyes, and now and then sobs shook her body, but the violence was modifying now, and the intervals between them were growing longer. Finally she looked up and saw Pierre Maurice, who had come in with the bishop, and she said to him, "Master Peter, where shall I be this night? Have you not good hope in God?" "Yes, and by his grace I shall be in paradise." Now Martin Levenue heard her in confession. Then she begged for the sacrament. But how grant the communion to one who had been publicly cut off from the church, and was now no more entitled to its privileges than the unbaptized pagan? The brother could not do this, but he sent to Cauchon to inquire what he must do. All laws, human and divine, were alike to that man. He respected none of them. He sent back orders to grant Joan whatever she wished. A last speech to him had reached his fears, perhaps. It could not reach his heart, for he had none. The Eucharist was brought now to that poor soul that had yearned for it such unutterable longing all these desolate months. It was a solemn moment. While we had been in the deeps of prison, the public courts of the castle had been filling up with crowds of humbler sort of men and women, who had learned what was going on in Joan's cell, and had come with softened hearts to do they know not what, to hear they know not what. We knew nothing of this, for they were out of our view, and there were other great crowds of the like castle gathered in masses outside the castle gates, and when the lights and the other accompaniments of the sacrament passed by, coming to Joan in the prison, all of those multitudes kneeled down and began to pray for her. Many wept, and we the solemn ceremony of the communion began in Joan's cell. Out of the distance a moving sound was born, moaning to our ears. It was those invisible multitudes chanting the litany for a departing soul. The fear of a fiery death was gone from Joan of Arc now, to come again no more, except for one fleeting instant, then it would pass, and serenity and courage would take its place, and it would abide. It would abide till the end. That's the next part of Joan of Arc, guys. I apologise. Very emotional. It's hard to keep those emotions at bay because she's innocent, and the way she's going to die, it's just not fair. So, yeah. Thank you for listening, and many blessings.